The phone was ringing at 7 in the morning, and Marcus Webb already knew it was going to be bad news. He had a feeling the night before. He could not explain it. He sat at the kitchen table after Priya went to sleep, staring at her gold medal hanging on the little hook he had drilled into the wall near the refrigerator, and something in his chest felt uneasy. He told himself he was being ridiculous. He told himself that good things were allowed to stay good. He went to bed. He did not sleep well. When he picked up the phone, the voice on the other end was calm and professional, in the way that people are when they have already decided something and are only calling to inform you of it. The man introduced himself as Gerald Hooper, district coordinator for the Regional Youth Gymnastics Association. He spoke slowly, as if he were reading from a card. He said there had been a review. He said a scoring discrepancy had been identified. He said the results of the championship meet, held 6 days prior, were being adjusted. Marcus stood in his kitchen in his socks, holding the phone very still, listening to Gerald Hooper explain in careful, measured words that the gold medal his 9-year-old daughter Priya had won at the Regional Youth Gymnastics Championship was being taken back. He asked Gerald to say that again. Gerald said it again. Marcus looked at the medal on the hook. It caught the morning light coming through the window above the sink. Gold and white, with a small red ribbon. Priya had worn it to school on Monday. Her teacher had let her show the class. She had come home that afternoon and told Marcus about it in full detail, standing in the hallway with her backpack still on, talking so fast that she kept tripping over her own sentences. He had stood there and listened to every word with his arms crossed, and a smile he could not have removed from his face if he had tried. He asked Gerald what kind of discrepancy. Gerald said a deduction had not been properly applied during the original scoring. He said the review process was standard. He said these things happen sometimes. Marcus asked to see the original score sheet. There was a pause on the line, not a long pause, maybe 3 seconds, but it was the kind of pause that tells you everything, if you are paying attention. Gerald said the matter had already been reviewed internally, and the decision was final. He said Marcus could direct any further questions to the association office, and he left a phone number. He said he was sorry for the inconvenience. He said to please return the medal by the end of the week. Then he said goodbye and hung up. Marcus stood in his kitchen for a long time after that. He did not move. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. Upstairs, he could hear Priya's alarm going off, the little chime she had set herself, the one that played a song from a cartoon she liked. He heard her feet hit the floor. He heard her moving around up there, getting ready for school, completely unaware that in the 4 minutes since she had been asleep, her gold medal had already been reclassified as someone else's property. He put the phone down on the counter. He looked at the medal again. He thought about the night of the competition, 6 days ago, when Priya had stood at the top of that podium. She had been nervous going in. She was always nervous going in. She had her mother's habit of chewing the inside of her cheek when she was anxious, and in the car on the way to the meet, Marcus had watched her do it in the rearview mirror and said nothing, because he knew from experience that saying anything at all would make it worse. The gymnasium had been loud and cold and smelled like the rubber floor mats they used at every one of these events. Marcus had found a seat in the 3rd row on the left side, the side closest to the beam apparatus, which was where Priya was performing first. He had his phone out. The screen was cracked along the bottom corner from when he had dropped it on the warehouse floor back in September, and the crack made it harder to see the photos clearly. But he had not yet had time to get it fixed. He watched his daughter walk out onto the floor, and he watched her do the thing she had been doing since she was 5 years old, and first asked him if she could try gymnastics. He watched her move through the routine with a focus that still surprised him every time he saw it. She did not look like a nervous child out there. She looked like someone who belonged exactly where she was. When the scores came up and the announcer called her name for first place, Marcus had stood up from his seat before he even realized he was doing it. The woman sitting next to him had laughed and clapped. He had apologized for blocking her view, and she had waved it off and said something kind about Priya, and he had nodded and tried to say something back but could not quite manage it, because he was busy holding his face together. He thought about all of that standing in his kitchen at 7 in the morning. Then he thought about Priya coming downstairs in about 4 minutes, and he made a decision. He reached up and took the medal off the hook. He opened the kitchen drawer, The one where he kept rubber bands and pens and the takeout menus he never threw away. And he put the medal inside. He closed the drawer. He did not know yet exactly what he was going to do, but he knew with complete certainty that he was not going to send the medal back by the end of the week. Priya came downstairs at 7:15 with her hair still damp from the shower and her backpack over one shoulder. She went straight to the refrigerator and stood in front of it for a long moment in the way that she always did, studying its contents as though she was expecting something new to have appeared since the night before. Marcus made her toast. He poured her a glass of orange juice. He asked about her homework. She told him about a project on river systems she was working on. He listened and asked questions and drove her to school. And during all of that time, she never once looked at the wall near the refrigerator, and he was grateful for that. On the way back home, Marcus stopped at a gas station and bought a small notebook and a pen. He sat in the parking lot and wrote down everything Gerald Hooper had said, every word he could remember, the exact time of the call, the name, the title, the phone number. He had always been like this, even before everything else in his life changed. Before he became a man raising a child alone, he had been someone who wrote things down. His supervisor at the logistics warehouse had once called it a strange habit for a floor worker. Marcus had not thought it was strange at all. He thought it was the most sensible thing a person could do. He went home. He made coffee. He sat down at the table with the notebook and his laptop, which was old and slow and took almost 4 minutes to fully start up. He went to the website for the Regional Youth Gymnastics Association. He read it from the top. He found the section on competitive rules and procedures. He found the section on scoring guidelines. He found a document labeled Adjudication Review Policy that was 12 pages long and had not been updated since 3 years prior. He read all of it. He read it again. Then he picked up his phone and called the association office number Gerald Hooper had given him. A woman answered. He gave his name. He said he was the parent of a competitor from the recent championship meet. He said he was requesting a copy of the original score sheet for his daughter's performance. The woman said she would need to pass the request along. He asked to whom. She said the administrative office. He asked for the name of the person in the administrative office who handled such requests. There was a pause very similar to Gerald Hooper's pause. She said she was not sure who specifically handled those requests. He asked if she could find out. She said she would try. He left his name and number and thanked her and hung up. He opened the notebook again and wrote down the time. He wrote down the name of the woman he had spoken to, which he had asked for at the start of the call. He wrote down exactly what she had said. Outside, a neighbor was mowing his lawn. A dog somewhere was barking steadily at something it would never catch. It was a completely ordinary Thursday morning, the kind of morning that would vanish from memory completely, except that Marcus Webb had already decided this one was going to mean something. He turned to a fresh page in the notebook. At the top, he wrote the date. Below that, he wrote Priya's name. Below that, he drew a line across the page and started writing down every question he had, in order, starting with the simplest one. He had a lot of questions. He had learned, a long time ago, that questions were not a sign of weakness. Questions were the only tools a person had when the people across from them had already made up their minds. You asked questions until you found the one they could not answer without revealing something they did not want you to see. Priya would be home at 3:15. That gave him 8 hours. He got to work. The administrative office never called back. Marcus was not surprised. He had expected to wait. He had spent enough time dealing with organizations of every kind to understand that silence was not an accident. Silence was a strategy. It was what institutions did when they hoped that whoever was asking would eventually get tired and go away. Marcus Webb did not get tired. On the second day after Gerald Hooper's call, he submitted a formal written request for the score sheets. He printed it on paper, because he had learned years ago that paper was harder to ignore than email. He drove to the association office himself. It was a narrow 2-floor building on the edge of a commercial strip near the highway, wedged between a dry cleaner and an insurance office. He walked in and handed the request to a young man at the front desk, who looked like he had never been handed a formal written request in his life. The young man said someone would be in touch. Marcus said he would look forward to that. He went to his night shift at the warehouse. He worked his 8 hours. He drove home at 6 in the morning, made breakfast, sent Priya to school, and slept for 4 hours. When he woke up, he opened his laptop and started reading. The state open records statute was long and not particularly interesting to read, but Marcus read it the way he read everything, slowly, and more than once, paying attention to the exact wording of every sentence. He was not a lawyer. He had never pretended to be one. But he had a quality that was more useful than a law degree in situations like this, which was that he refused to be intimidated by pages of official language. He had spent 11 years on a warehouse floor reading freight manifests, compliance notices, and equipment safety documents. Dry language did not frighten him. He found the relevant section of the statute on his third pass through the document. Citizens had a right to request records from organizations that received public funding. Youth sports associations that operated under state licensing and used public gymnasium facilities for competitions received public funding. The request had to be answered within a specific number of days. The law named the days. It named the penalties for non-compliance. Marcus wrote down the statute number. He wrote down the section. He wrote down the deadline. Then he waited. He did not wait passively. While he was waiting, he drove to the public library and used one of the computers there to look up everything he could find about the Regional Youth Gymnastics Association. He found their tax filings, which were publicly available. He found an archived version of their website from 2 years earlier that showed a different set of board members than the current site. He found a local newspaper article from 4 years ago about a rule change in youth scoring that had been quietly implemented without apparent vote. He did not know yet why any of that mattered. He wrote it all down anyway. On day 5, after his formal written request, he received a response in the mail. 3 pages. The association's official letterhead at the top, and then 12 paragraphs of language that said, in effect, nothing at all. There was a reference to internal privacy policies. There was a reference to the finality of administrative reviews. There was no score sheet. Marcus read the letter twice. He set it down on the table. He looked out the window for a moment. Then he picked up his pen and wrote, at the top of a fresh page in his notebook, they sent a letter instead of the document. Why? That question bothered him more than any of the others. When an organization refuses to produce a specific document and sends 3 pages of policy language instead, it is because the document contains something they do not want you to see. Marcus understood that from the very first time he had dealt with a company dispute years before, when a freight supplier had tried to charge his employer for a delivery that had never arrived. The supplier had sent pages of invoices and procedure documents. They had never sent the delivery confirmation, because there was no delivery confirmation, because the delivery had not happened. The association had sent him 3 pages about why they did not have to show him the score sheet. They had not sent him the score sheet. He filed a second request. This one cited the statute directly, by number and section. He included a paragraph stating clearly that under state law, the failure to produce the requested records within the legal deadline constituted a violation, and that he was prepared to escalate the matter to the appropriate oversight body if necessary. He drove back to the office and handed it to the same young man at the front desk, who this time looked like he wished he were somewhere else entirely. 3 days later, Marcus's phone rang. This time it was not Gerald Hooper. This time it was a woman named Patricia Elwood, who introduced herself as the association's director of operations. Her voice was the smooth, even voice of someone who had spent a long time managing difficult conversations, and she opened by saying she appreciated his patience and wanted to resolve the matter directly. Marcus said he appreciated that as well. Patricia Elwood said the association took parent concerns very seriously. She said the review process had been thorough and fair. She said she understood this was disappointing news, and that she was sorry for any confusion. Marcus let her finish. Then he asked, very politely, for the original score sheet. Patricia said the records were internal documents. Marcus read her the statute number. There was a silence. He said nothing during the silence, which was one of the most useful things he had ever learned to do. Patricia said she would need to consult with their legal counsel before responding further. Marcus said that was fine. He reminded her of the statutory deadline, which at this point had already passed. He said he hoped to hear from her soon. He said goodbye and hung up. He wrote down the time. He wrote down her name and title. He wrote down everything she had said. Then he did something he had not planned to do. He called the other families. He had their numbers because the association maintained a parent directory, which was distributed at the start of each competitive season. He had received a copy in September. He sat at the kitchen table with the directory open, and he went through it carefully, looking at the names of the children who had competed in Priya's age category at the championship meet. He did not call all of them. He called 7 families, specifically the ones whose daughters had finished in the top 4 positions across the different event categories, based on what he remembered from the day of the competition and from the results sheet that had been posted briefly on the association website before being taken down 48 hours after the event. The results sheet being taken down was the thing that had started to make him deeply uneasy. He called a woman named Carol Brine first, because her daughter Nadia had placed second in the floor exercise and Carol had been sitting 2 seats away from Marcus during the event. He had spoken to her briefly that day. She was warm and direct and did not waste words. He told her about the phone call from Gerald Hooper. He told her about the score review. He asked if she had received any similar communication. There was a pause. Carol said yes. She said Nadia had also been notified of a score adjustment. She said they had been told Nadia's second-place result was being changed to a 4th. She said she had assumed it was a genuine error and had not pushed back, because she did not know she was allowed to. Marcus asked if he could share what he had found with her. She said yes, immediately, without hesitation. He called a man named Derek Fulton next. Derek's daughter, Imani, had won the beam event. Derek said their medal had already been returned to the association because he had not wanted to make trouble. He said the words, "make trouble," in a way that made it clear he had been using those words to talk himself out of his own anger for days. Marcus told him he understood. He said he was not looking to cause problems. He said he just wanted to understand what had actually happened. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What did actually happen?" Marcus told him what he knew so far. He called 5 more families over the course of that afternoon. A father named Owen Price, whose daughter had placed first in the ribbon event and been moved to 3rd. A mother named Sandra Gill, whose daughter had won vault and had the result quietly reclassified as 2nd place. A grandmother named Dorothy Vance, who was raising her granddaughter alone and had cried on the phone for 3 minutes when Marcus told her what he had found, before she collected herself and asked what she could do to help. By 6 o'clock that evening, Marcus had spoken to 7 families. All 7 had received similar communications. All 7 had children whose results had been changed after the event. All 7 had been told the matter was final. He sat at the table with his notebook and drew a column down the center of the page. On the left, he wrote the original results as he remembered them from the day of the competition. On the right, he wrote what the families had been told the revised results were. He looked at the 2 columns for a long time. Every child whose result had been altered was a girl of color. Marcus sat very still. He had not gone into this expecting to find that. He had gone into it expecting to find a bureaucratic error, or at worst a single incident of carelessness. He had gone in because his daughter had won something fair and been told she had not, and he had wanted to understand why. He had not gone in looking for a pattern, but a pattern was what he had found. He thought about what to do with that for a long time. He thought about Gerald Hooper's careful voice on the phone. He thought about Patricia Elwood and her language about internal processes and legal counsel. He thought about Derek Fulton saying, "make trouble" in that particular way. He thought about Priya. He got up and cooked dinner. He made rice and chicken and the specific kind of green salad Priya liked, the one with the thin sliced cucumbers and the lime dressing he had worked out the proportions of over the course of many attempts. He set the table. He called Priya down from her room where she was doing homework. She came downstairs and sat across from him and talked about school. She talked about the River Systems project, which she was doing with a partner named Celia who kept changing her mind about the format. She talked about a funny thing that had happened at lunch. She talked about a book she was reading. She did not mention the medal, and Marcus did not bring it up. But when dinner was done and she had gone back upstairs and the kitchen was quiet, he sat down at the table again with his notebook, and he made a decision that he had, truthfully, already been moving toward for days. He was not going to accept a closed door. He opened his laptop. He went back to the state oversight website. He found the complaints procedure for the Athletics Regulatory Board. He downloaded the form. It was 6 pages. He filled it out by hand, carefully, in his neatest printing, because neatness mattered to him, and because documents that were easy to read were documents that got read. He attached copies of everything: his original request, the association's non-response, the statutory deadline, his notes from the phone calls, the names of 7 families, the original results as he remembered them, the revised results as the families had been told. He wrote a cover letter. He kept it short. He stated the facts. He did not use words like outrageous or unfair. He did not say he was angry, even though he was. He knew that emotion in documents invited people to focus on the emotion rather than the facts, and the facts here were more than enough. At 11:30 that night, with Priya asleep upstairs, Marcus Webb sealed the envelope. He put a stamp on it. He set it by the front door so he would not forget it in the morning. Then he turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark for a moment, in the quiet house, and felt the particular feeling he always felt at this stage of any fight worth having, which was not confidence exactly, but something simpler, a steadiness, a sense that the next step was clear, and he was going to take it. He went to bed. This time he slept. The envelope went into the mail on a Friday morning. By the following Tuesday, Marcus had already moved on to the next problem, which was proving what he believed to be true, rather than simply believing it. Belief was not enough. He knew that. It had never been enough. A man standing in front of an institution with nothing but his own conviction was a man who could be ignored, and institutions were very good at ignoring people. He needed something harder than belief. He needed documents. He drove to the public library again. He was becoming a familiar face at the reference desk, and the librarian there, a quiet older man named Henry who wore the same gray cardigan every day and seemed to have read everything ever published, had begun to anticipate what Marcus was looking for. Henry showed him how to access archived records for nonprofit organizations. He showed him how to find submission logs from public facilities. He explained which parts of the state athletics database were accessible to ordinary citizens and which required a formal request. Marcus spent 4 hours at the library that first Tuesday. He came back Thursday. He came back the following Monday. Every time he came, he brought his notebook and wrote everything down, and every night he organized what he had found into sections. The picture that was forming was detailed and specific, and troubling in a way that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with facts. Here is what Marcus had established by the end of his second week of research. The championship meet had been held at the Westfield Community Recreation Center, which was a public facility that maintained its own log of events and their recorded outcomes for insurance and liability purposes. Marcus had submitted a records request to the Recreation Center directly, separately from his request to the association. The Recreation Center had no reason to protect the association's interests, and they responded within the legal time frame. The response included a copy of the event log entry for the championship date. It listed the competing athletes and the scores as they had been recorded at the facility on the day of the event, by the facility's own independent scorer who was present at all competitions for certification purposes. Marcus laid the facility log next to the results that the association had sent to the families after the review. They were not the same. In 7 cases, the scores had been changed. In 6 of those 7 cases, the change moved the child down in her final placement. In 1 case, the change was small enough that the placement did not change, but the margin was reduced significantly. He went back further. He found the archived results from the previous year's championship. He found the year before that. He filed records requests for both. He got responses within the week, because the recreation center was efficient and had no stake in the matter. He spent one very long night at the kitchen table, comparing 3 years of results between what the facility had recorded and what the association had officially published. The pattern appeared in all 3 years, not in every result, not for every child, but consistently, across all 3 years, the adjustments that had been made after the fact had moved children of color down and moved other children up, and in no case that Marcus could find had the pattern ever worked in reverse. He stared at those pages for a long time. He had not set out to build a case about systemic discrimination. He had set out to get his daughter's medal back, but the evidence had taken him somewhere much larger than a single medal. And once you had seen that evidence, you could not pretend you had not seen it. He called Carol Brine. He told her what he had found. He asked if he could come and show her. She said yes. She gave him an address. He drove over on a Saturday morning while Priya was at practice, with a folder of printed documents and his notebook, and he sat at Carol's kitchen table while she read through everything. Her daughter Nadia was in the next room watching something on a tablet. Carol read slowly and carefully and did not say anything until she had finished. Then she set the papers down and was quiet for a moment. She said, "How did nobody catch this before?" Marcus said he thought a lot of people had caught it before. He thought some of them had simply not known what to do with what they had seen. Carol nodded slowly. She said she wanted to show the other families. Marcus said that was why he had come. They called a meeting. They picked a Sunday afternoon because most of the families were available then. Carol offered her house because it was the largest. Marcus brought 2 copies of every document he had, organized in labeled folders, one for each family. On Sunday, 7 families sat in Carol's living room. There were parents and grandparents and in 2 cases older siblings who had driven their younger brothers or sisters to the meeting because the parents were working. There were children playing in the backyard, visible through the sliding glass door. Marcus stood at the front of the room with his folder and explained what he had found, starting from the beginning. He spoke plainly. He did not use language he did not understand, and he did not use language he thought other people might not understand. He stated each fact and showed the document that supported it before moving to the next fact. He went through the facility records. He went through the comparison with the association's published results. He went through the 3-year pattern. He went through the statutory violations. He went through the complaint he had already submitted to the Athletics Oversight Board. When he finished, the room was quiet. Derek Fulton spoke first. He asked if Marcus had spoken to a lawyer. Marcus said he had not. He said he had considered it, but had not yet found that he needed one, because so far everything he was doing was a matter of public record access and formal complaint procedures, which any citizens he could pursue. Derek said he knew someone who might help, a law professor at the State University who had done some work on discrimination cases in youth sports. He said he did not know if she would take an interest, but that he could ask. Marcus said that would be very useful. Sandra Gill asked what happened if the Oversight Board did nothing. Marcus said he had thought about that. He said there were escalation pathways above the board. He said there was also the option of going to the press, but that he would prefer to pursue official channels first and fully, because going to the press was a step you could take once and could not take back, and he wanted to be certain that when they took it, they had everything they needed to say what they needed to say. Sandra nodded. She said that made sense. Dorothy Vance, the grandmother who had cried on the phone, was sitting at the back of the room with her hands folded in her lap. She raised her hand in the careful way that people do when they are not used to speaking in groups. She said, "What do you need from us?" Marcus said he needed 2 things. He needed written statements from each family, describing the communication they had received from the association, in their own words, with dates and details, and he needed them to be prepared to be patient, because this was going to take time. Dorothy said she had been patient for a lot of years with a lot of things. She said this one felt worth being patient for. There was a sound of agreement in the room, quiet and collective, the kind that comes when people who have been sitting alone with the same thought realize they are not alone at all. Marcus drove home that afternoon with something he had not entirely expected to find, which was company. He had started this as a father trying to get his daughter's medal back. He was now something slightly different. He was not sure yet what to call it. He was not the kind of man who thought in those terms. He was just a man with a folder of documents and a very clear sense of what the next step was. The next step was the written statements. He sent each family a simple template he had put together himself, just a guide to help them organize their accounts, and asked them to return their statements within 10 days. All 7 came back within 5. He compiled them into a second package to accompany the original complaint. He wrote a cover letter. He added the facility records from all 3 years. He added the statistical comparison he had done, laid out in a simple table with a brief explanatory note. He drove the package to the State Athletics Oversight Board office in person, because he had learned by now that things delivered in person were harder to misplace than things sent by mail. The office was in the State Building downtown, on the 4th floor, past a security desk, and a long hallway with photographs of state athletic events on the walls. Marcus checked in at the front desk and asked to submit supplementary materials on a pending complaint. He handed over the package. The woman at the desk gave him a receipt. He stood in the hallway for a moment before he got back on the elevator. He looked at the photographs on the walls. Youth track events, swimming competitions, basketball tournaments. In all of the photographs, children were running and jumping and competing with the particular intensity of young people who care enormously about something. He thought about Priya on that podium. He took the elevator down and walked out into the cold air and got in his car. He had a night shift starting in 3 hours. He drove home. He made a sandwich. He changed into his work clothes. He kissed the top of Priya's head where she was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. She looked up and said, "Dad, you look tired." He said he was fine. She looked at him for a moment with the specific look she had inherited from her mother, the one that meant she was deciding whether to push further on something. Then she went back to her homework. He drove to the warehouse. He worked his shift. He moved freight. He logged the hours. He drove home at dawn. And somewhere in a filing cabinet on the 4th floor of the State Building downtown, a package of evidence sat waiting for someone to open it, containing the names of 7 children and 3 years of numbers that told a story no one in the Regional Youth Gymnastics Association had ever expected anyone to put together. That was the thing about people who were supposed to be powerless. They were only powerless right up until the moment they stopped believing they were. Marcus Webb had stopped believing that a long time ago. The call from the State Athletics Oversight Board came on a Wednesday afternoon, 4 weeks after Marcus had submitted his supplementary package. He was at home, eating lunch, when the phone rang. The woman who called introduced herself as Denise Carver. She said she was the lead investigator assigned to his complaint file. She said the board had completed an initial review of the materials he had submitted, and that the matter was being escalated to a formal inquiry. Marcus set down his fork. He said calmly that he was glad to hear it. Denise Carver said she had some questions and asked if he had time to speak. He said yes. She asked detailed questions for 40 minutes. She asked about the timeline of every communication. She asked about the sources of his facility records. She asked about his methodology for the 3-year statistical comparison. She was precise and professional and did not waste words, and Marcus respected that. At the end of the call, she said the board intended to request its own records from the Regional Youth Gymnastics Association and from the Westfield Recreation Center. She said the 7 families would likely be contacted for the formal statements they had already written. She said the process would take time, and she wanted him to understand that. Marcus said he understood that very well. She said she wanted to be honest with him about one more thing. She said that complaints of this nature were difficult. She said the burden of proof was high, and that even a strong body of circumstantial evidence did not guarantee a particular outcome. She said she wanted him to go into the process with realistic expectations. Marcus said he appreciated her honesty. He said he had realistic expectations. He said his expectation was that someone was going to look very carefully at what had happened, and that the people responsible were going to be held accountable for it. There was a brief pause. Denise Carver said she would be in touch and thanked him for his time. Marcus hung up. He picked up his fork. He finished his lunch. He told no one about the call except Carol Brine, whom he called that evening to let her know the inquiry was moving forward. He had made a habit of keeping Carol informed because she was organized and clear-headed, and had become a kind of informal liaison to the other families, passing along updates so Marcus did not have to make 7 individual calls every time something happened. Carol said, "How do you feel?" Marcus thought about it. He said he felt the same as he had felt since the beginning, which was that there was a thing that needed to be done, and he was doing it. He said he would feel something else when it was finished. Carol laughed a little. She said that sounded about right. In the weeks that followed, the investigation moved in ways that Marcus could not fully see, but could partially infer from the edges. The association received a formal notice of inquiry, which became known to Marcus only because Patricia Elwood called him. Her voice this time was different from the smooth, managed tone of their first call. It was tighter, controlled, but only just. She said the association was cooperating fully with the board. She said she wanted Marcus to know that. She also said, after a moment, that the association regretted any distress the situation had caused the affected families. Marcus noted the specific wording, regretted the distress, not regretted the action. The action itself was still, in Patricia Elwood's framing, something other than a mistake. He said he appreciated the call and thanked her for letting him know. He wrote down everything she had said after he hung up. 3 weeks into the formal inquiry, the law professor Derek Fulton had mentioned reached out. Her name was Dr. Linda Marsh, and she was exactly what Marcus had hoped for, and slightly more formidable than he had expected. She had written 2 academic papers on discrimination in youth sports adjudication. She had testified before the state legislature on the topic once, years ago, as part of a broader equity review. She was methodical and direct and had a voice that sounded like it did not frequently hear the word no. She called Marcus first, because Derek had given her his number. She asked him to walk her through everything from the beginning. He did, in the same clear, organized way he had explained it to the families in Carol's living room. She asked questions throughout. She asked good questions, specific ones that made him think about aspects of the evidence he had not fully considered. At the end of the call, she said she thought his documentation was some of the most organized citizen research she had ever encountered in this type of case. She said that was not a small thing, and she said it without flattery, just as a plain statement of fact. He said he had a lot of time between 2 and 4 in the morning. She laughed. She said she wanted to submit a brief to the Oversight Board in support of the complaint, drawing on her published research and the statistical analysis Marcus had compiled. She said it would not hurt, and it might help. She asked if he had any objection. He said he had no objection at all. She said she would be in touch. She was, 3 days later, with a copy of the brief, which was 17 pages long and cited, among other things, a decade of national research on the unconscious and deliberate manipulation of youth sports scoring as a vector of systemic exclusion. It was dense and academic, but its conclusion was simple. What the evidence in Marcus's complaint described had precedents, and those precedents had consequences. Marcus read it twice. He said nothing about it to Priya. He said nothing about any of it to Priya. She was focused on practice. She had a regional qualifier coming up in 2 months. He drove her to practice. He picked her up from practice. He made dinner. He helped with homework. He went to work. He came home. He researched. He wrote things down. He waited. Waiting was its own kind of work. The formal hearing was scheduled for a date 6 weeks out. Marcus was notified in writing. The letter told him the board had determined the complaint warranted a full review hearing, that the association had been notified, and that representatives from both sides would be invited to present. He read the letter standing at the kitchen counter. He put it down and stared at the wall for a moment. He had known it was coming. He had worked toward it, but seeing it on paper, with a date and a room number and the official header of the state board, was different from knowing it was coming. It was the difference between understanding that something would happen and understanding that something was real. He called Carol. He called Derek. He called the other families. He told them all the same thing. The hearing was scheduled, and he needed them there if they could come. He said he understood, if some of them could not. He said it would matter if they could. Every single one of them said they would be there. Marcus spent the next 6 weeks preparing as carefully as he had prepared for anything in his life. He organized his documents into a binder with tabbed sections. He practiced what he was going to say by saying it out loud in the kitchen at night, after Priya was asleep, talking to no one, refining each sentence until it was as clear and as short as it could be, while still saying exactly what he needed it to say. He was not a public speaker. He had never stood in front of a board and addressed a room. But he had spent 40 years watching how people with power talked to people without it. And he had learned, over a very long time, that the thing that frightened powerful people most was a quiet person who knew exactly what they were talking about. The day before the hearing, Priya came home from school and found him at the table with the binder open in front of him. She sat down across from him without being asked. She looked at the binder. She looked at him. She said, "Is this about my medal?" He had been deciding for weeks how to handle this question when it came. He had decided early on that he would not lie to her. He would not pretend he had not been doing anything. He would not make her feel like she was being protected from something she had a right to know. He said yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked what was happening. He told her. Not everything. Not the 3-year pattern, not the full scope of what he believed had occurred. But he told her that her score had been changed, and that he did not believe it had been changed fairly, and that he had been talking to some people about it. She listened without interrupting, which was not always how she listened. When he finished, she said, "Are you going to fix it?" He said he was going to try. He said he could not promise anything but that he was going to do everything he could. She thought about this. Then she said, with a simplicity that settled the whole room, "You always do." She got up and went to get a snack from the kitchen. He sat at the table for a while and looked at nothing in particular. The next morning, Marcus Webb put on the gray jacket he owned. It was the one he had worn to his wife's funeral and had not worn since, because it was the most formal thing he had, and he had not found an occasion formal enough to bring it back out. He thought this was one. He picked up his binder. He drove downtown. He parked in the state building lot. He rode the elevator to the 4th floor. When he walked into the hearing room, 5 officials from the Regional Youth Gymnastics Association were already seated on one side of the table. 3 of them had legal counsel. The room was quiet and bright and formal, with a long table and a panel of 7 board members seated at the front. Marcus sat down on the opposite side of the table. Behind him, in the rows of chairs set up for observers, were 7 families: Carol Brine, Derek Fulton, Sandra Gill, Owen Price, Dorothy Vance, and the 2 others, all of them present, all of them quiet, all of them there. He set his binder on the table in front of him and placed his hands flat on top of it. The board chair opened the hearing. She stated the purpose. She outlined the procedure. She asked both parties if they were ready to proceed. The association's lead attorney said yes. Marcus said yes. The board chair nodded. She said the first party to present their position would be the petitioner. Marcus opened his binder to the first tab. He began to speak. He did not raise his voice once during the entire proceeding. He did not use dramatic language. He stated the date of the championship. He stated the score as recorded by the facility. He stated the score as revised by the association. He stated the names of the other 6 children whose results had been similarly altered. He cited the statutory violations. He presented the 3-year comparison. The association's attorney objected twice. Both times, Marcus answered the objection directly and with the specific document that addressed it. The attorney was very good at her job, and she attempted to reframe the evidence as administrative process and procedural ambiguity and the natural complexity of youth sports adjudication. Marcus waited until she was finished each time. Then he answered in sentences of 6 words or fewer. At one point, she said that the review process was not designed to be adversarial. Marcus said, quietly and without heat, "It wasn't designed to be, but it was." The room was very still after that. The board deliberated for 40 minutes while everyone waited in the hallway. Marcus sat on a bench near the elevator, with his binder on his knees. Derek Fulton sat next to him. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say. The work was done. When the board chair came out and asked everyone to return to the room, her face told Marcus nothing at all, and he was glad for that, because it meant she was a serious person. She read the decision into the record. The vote was 7-0. The original scores were reinstated. The altered records would be flagged and submitted to a comprehensive audit covering 5 years of competition results. Every official whose name appeared on the revised score sheets was suspended immediately, pending the outcome of that audit. Marcus sat and listened to all of it. He did not move. He did not make a sound. He held the binder on his knees and listened until the last word was read. Then he released a breath he felt like he had been holding for 6 weeks. Behind him, Dorothy Vance said something softly to herself. It was too quiet to hear. It did not need to be heard. Marcus turned around and looked at the 7 families in the chairs behind him. He looked at each of them. He did not have anything to say that was equal to the moment, so he said nothing. He nodded once. They nodded back. Outside the building, in the cold air, Derek Fulton shook his hand and held it for a moment longer than a regular handshake. Carol Brine said, "You did it." Marcus said they had all done it, which was true. Dorothy Vance hugged him without asking, which he was surprised to find he did not mind. He drove home. He took the medal out of the kitchen drawer, where it had been sitting for 7 weeks. He went upstairs, Priya was in her room, doing homework, headphones on. He knocked on the door frame. She looked up and pulled one headphone off. He held the metal out. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. He said simply, "It's yours." She got up from her desk and took it from him, and turned it over in her hands, looking at it the way she had looked at it the first time she held it, with the same expression she got when she was trying to decide if something was really as good as she thought it was, and then deciding yes, it was. She said, "Can I put it back on the wall?" He said yes. She went downstairs. He heard the small sound of the hook scraping the wall, and then quiet. He stood in the doorway of her room for a moment, looking at her desk, the books and pencils and the printed pages of the River Systems project. The ordinary, complete evidence of a child's life going exactly as it was supposed to go. He went downstairs. The metal was back on its hook by the refrigerator. He looked at it for a moment. Then he started making dinner. The audit took 4 months. Marcus knew it was happening, because the board sent him a courtesy notice at the start, and an update letter every 6 weeks, and because Denise Carver called him twice during that period to ask clarifying questions about 2 specific data points in the comparison he had submitted. He answered the questions. He thanked her. He went back to his life. His life was what it had always been. Night shifts at the warehouse, morning breakfasts, school runs, Priya's practices 3 times a week, every week, in the same gymnasium that smelled like rubber floor mats, and the particular focused energy of children working very hard at something they loved. He sat in the bleachers and watched her, and wrote nothing down, because there was nothing to write, because this was just life, and life did not require documentation. The results of the audit were released on a Thursday morning in late spring. The board had reviewed 5 years of competition results across all age categories in the district. They had compared facility records against association-published results for every event in that period. The discrepancies that Marcus had identified in 3 years of results for Priya's age category turned out to be part of a wider pattern across the entire district program, one that had affected a significant number of children and had gone undetected because no one had ever thought to compare the 2 sets of records side by side. 3 senior officials were terminated. 2 more resigned before the termination process reached them. A new scoring protocol was implemented, requiring independent verification at every event, with records submitted to both the facility and the association simultaneously, in a shared system that neither party could alter without the other's knowledge. The board's written statement cited, among other things, the complaint filed by Marcus Webb and the supplementary documentation he had submitted. Marcus read the statement at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while he was reading. He put it down. He looked out the window. The neighbor across the street was out early, walking his dog in the pale spring light, and the dog was pulling eagerly toward something in the grass that was probably a squirrel, and was definitely not going to cooperate. He thought about calling Carol, or Derek, or any of the other families. He decided to give it a few hours, to let people read it in their own time and in their own way, before the phones started going. He was right about the phones. By 10 o'clock that morning, he had heard from all 7 families. The calls were short, because there was not a lot to say that had not already been said. What had needed to happen had happened. The calls were mostly just the sound of people needing to confirm together that it was real. Dorothy Vance's call was the last one. She talked for a while, which was unlike her. She told him about her granddaughter Kezia, who was practicing a new floor routine, and who had recently told Dorothy that she wanted to compete for as long as her body let her. Dorothy said that before all of this, Kezia had been considering quitting. She had not told Marcus that part before. She had not told anyone. She said Kezia had come home after the medal was taken, and had gone quiet for several days, in a way that Dorothy had not known how to reach, and that on one particular night, Dorothy had sat outside her bedroom door, and listened to her, and not known what to do. She said Kezia was not quiet anymore. Marcus did not know what to say to that, so he said he was glad, which was true but smaller than what he felt. Dorothy said, "You know you changed something bigger than a score." He said he hoped so. She said she knew so, and she said it in the same certain way she had said everything else, and he believed her. In the weeks that followed the audit release, something happened that Marcus had not anticipated. He started getting calls from people he did not know, parents from other districts who had heard about the case through word of mouth, or through a short piece that a local journalist had written after the board's statement was released. The piece had been careful and factual, which Marcus appreciated, and it had not used the word hero, which he appreciated even more, because he was not one, and the word made him uncomfortable in the particular way that words do when they are applied to ordinary things, and make them sound like something other than what they were. What he had done was read documents and write things down and refuse to stop asking questions. That was not heroism. That was just not giving up. But people called, and he answered, and when he could be useful, he tried to be. He told people what he had found, and how he had found it. He told them about the Open Records Statute. He told them about the facility records that organizations used for liability and insurance that no one ever thought to ask for. He told them that the most powerful thing he had discovered in the whole process was also the simplest, which was that institutions counted on people not knowing what they were entitled to ask for. Dr. Linda Marsh called him in early summer. She said she was writing a follow-up paper on the case and wanted to cite his methodology. She asked if he had any objection. He said no. She said she wanted to include a quote, if he was willing. She said she wanted to describe what he had done and how he had done it, because she thought it was a model that other parents in similar situations could use. He said that was fine with him. She asked if there was anything he wanted to say, anything she could include in his own words. He thought about it for longer than she probably expected. He thought about the phone call at 7 in the morning. He thought about the notebook he had bought at the gas station. He thought about the 4 minutes he had stood in the kitchen before he heard Priya's feet hit the floor upstairs. He thought about all the hours at the library and the kitchen table, and the night shifts and the cold coffee and the hearing room. He said, I want people to know that the door was closed. I just didn't take that to mean I had to go away. She wrote it down. He heard the pen. Summer arrived. Priya grew half an inch and complained that her competition leotard no longer fit, and Marcus measured her and ordered a new one and ironed it the night before her first summer meet. She placed first in the vault. She placed second in the floor exercise. She came off the mat with her chest heaving and her face bright with the effort, and she found Marcus in the stands the way she always did, immediately and without looking around, as though she always knew exactly where he was. He raised one hand. She raised both of hers. He sat back down. The woman next to him said something about what a good routine it had been. He agreed. He took a photograph with his phone, the same phone with the cracked screen he still had not gotten around to fixing, and the crack cut across the bottom of the picture, but you could see Priya clearly, bright and standing straight, still breathing hard. He kept the photograph. On a Friday evening in August, Marcus was in the kitchen making dinner, when Priya came in from the backyard and stood at the refrigerator for a moment, the way she always did. She looked at the metal on the hook by the refrigerator. It had been back on that hook for months. She looked at it the way she looked at things she passed every day, comfortably, without thinking about it, the way you look at something that belongs exactly where it is. Then she looked at Marcus. She said, Dad? He said, Yeah. She said, Thanks for not giving up. He turned around from the stove. She was already opening the refrigerator, looking at its contents with the usual air of mild disappointment at finding only food inside. He looked at her for a moment. The evening light was coming in through the window. The refrigerator hummed. Everything was completely ordinary and entirely as it should be. He said, Of course. She pulled out a container of leftover rice and held it up questioningly. He said yes, that was fine. He was making chicken. She put the rice on the counter and closed the refrigerator and went back to whatever she had been doing before, and Marcus turned back to the stove, and dinner was made, and the evening passed. The metal stayed on its hook. In the morning, Marcus went to work. He worked the overnight shift. He moved freight. He logged hours. He came home at dawn when the sky was the specific pale gray-pink color it was only for about 15 minutes, before the full light came in. He stood on the front step for a moment before he went inside. He thought about a lot of things in those 15 minutes, the way a person does when they are tired and the world is quiet, and there is space to think. He thought about the 7 families. He thought about Kezia not quitting. He thought about Dorothy outside a bedroom door not knowing what to do. He thought about the moment in the hearing room when the board chair read the decision into the record, and he had let out a breath he had been holding for 6 weeks. He thought about Priya, asleep inside, who would wake up in 2 hours and eat toast and go to school, and tell him something funny that happened at lunch, and who would not think, today or any day, that any of what had happened to her medal was the limit of what she could expect from the world, because her father had made sure it was not. He went inside, he made coffee, he sat at the kitchen table with his notebook, which was mostly full now, and turned to one of the last blank pages. He had formed the habit of writing down one thing at the end of each entry, not a fact or a timeline note, but just something he had thought or understood that day. He looked at the blank page for a moment. Then he wrote, "The door was closed. It was not locked." He closed the notebook. He drank his coffee. Outside, the light was coming in.